They say every town has its secrets, but ours had St. Jude's. From the outside, it was a picture of serenity, a classic stone church with a steeple that seemed to pierce the very heavens. But we locals knew better. We knew the ground it stood on was older than the town itself, older than any memory recorded in books. It was sacred land, belonging to a people long vanished, and building a church on it was a profound act of arrogance. My great-grandfather was one of the men who laid the foundation stones back in the late 1800s. He wrote in his journal about the strange journeys that settled over the construction site as they dug into the earth. They found artifacts, carved bones, intricate beadwork, and flat stones etched with symbols they couldn't decipher. Instead of preserving them, the town's founder, a zealous man named Elias Thorne, ordered them buried beneath the church's altar, a symbolic crushing of the old ways to make room for the new. That was the first mistake. The story started almost immediately. Whispers in the empty pews, shadows flitting at the edge of your vision, the heavy oak doors creaking open on windless nights. The first priest, Father Michael, lasted only a year. He left town in a hurry, his hair turned stark white, muttering about voices that promised him knowledge in exchange for his flock's devotion not to God, but to the soil beneath their feet. Over the decades, St. Jude's became a place you only visited out of obligation. Weddings felt somber, baptisms carried a strange weight, and funerals, well, funerals at St. Jude's were the worst. It felt like the ground was eager to reclaim what was its own. The old-timers said the land didn't want the dead to rest. It wanted them to serve. My story with St. Jude's begins on a dare. I was 16, full of the kind of reckless confidence only a teenager can possess. My friends, Sarah, Mark, and I decided we would spend a night inside the church. We wanted to debunk the myths, to laugh in the face of our town's deepest fear. It was a cool October night, the air crisp with the smell of fallen leaves and approaching rain. Getting in was easy. A loose cellar window, long neglected, gave way with a soft groan. We dropped into the damp, musty darkness below the church, our flashlight beams cutting shaky paths through the gloom. The cellar was filled with forgotten relics, piles of old hymnals, dusty vestments, and a broken baptismal font. We made our way up the stone steps and emerged into the main sanctuary. The silence in there was different. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence, heavy and suffocating. The air was frigid, far colder than it was outside. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting long, distorted figures across the pews. The massive crucifix above the altar seemed to watch us, its painted eyes full of sorrow and warning. For the first hour, nothing happened. We whispered jokes, daring each other to sit in the priest's chair or touch the altar. I remember Mark trying to play a few discordant notes on the old organ. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the oppressive quiet. That's when we heard it, a low hum. It wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was just there. It vibrated through the stone floor, up our legs, and into our chests. It was a deep, resonant sound, like 1,000 voices chanting in a language we couldn't understand. We froze, our bravado evaporating into sheer terror. Sarah, who was standing nearest the altar, let out a small gasp. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her flashlight was pointed at the floor right in front of the altar. We looked closer. The stone slab my great-grandfather had helped lay was glowing with a faint, pulsing blue light, the ancient symbols etched into its surface now visible. The humming grew louder, the vibrations more intense, and then the whispers started. They weren't in our ears, they were inside our heads. Soft, enticing voices. One promised me success, showed me images of a future where I was famous and admired. It told me all I had to do was kneel, to give my respect not to the cross, but to the ground. Mark wasn't so lucky. His face went pale, his eyes wide with horror. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it was no use. "They're showing me things," he choked out. "Horrible things. Accidents, fires, The temperature dropped even further. Our breath plumed in the air. A dark, formless shadow began to pool around the base of the altar. It wasn't a trick of the light, it was a tangible darkness, swirling and coalescing. The whispers in my head became a single, dominant voice. It spoke of cycles, of balance, and of a debt that was long overdue. It said the church was an insult, a cage built to trap something that could never be contained. It fed on faith, it told me, twisting devotion into a source of power. That's when the pews began to shake. A low, guttural growl echoed through the sanctuary, and the heavy front doors slammed shut with a boom that shook the entire building. Panic set in, we were trapped. Sarah started screaming. The shadow by the altar rose, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape, tall and gaunt, with long, spindly limbs. It had no face, just a swirling void where features should have been. It turned its head towards us, and the psychic pressure became unbearable. The voice in my head was screaming now, demanding tribute, demanding sacrifice. It wanted one of us. I grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her back. "We have to get out," I yelled, my voice sounding thin and weak. Mark was paralyzed, staring at the entity, tears streaming down his face. "It knows my name," he mumbled. "It knows my mother's name." The thing glided towards us, silent and inexorable. Its presence felt like drowning. My great-grandfather's journal flashed in my mind. He wrote that the old people believed the land required a guardian. It didn't want to harm, but to protect its sanctity. Thorn had desecrated it, and the church had become a prison, turning a guardian spirit into a warden of tormented souls. Thinking fast, I remembered the artifacts buried beneath the altar. Maybe the opposite was also true. I looked at the giant crucifix. It was a symbol of one faith, but it was also a focal point, an anchor. "The cross," I screamed. "Focus on the cross. Don't listen to the voices." I don't know if it was faith or just a desperate act of defiance, but Sarah and I both stared at the crucifix, pouring all our focus, all our will, into that single point. The psychic assault lessened, the whispers receding to a dull roar. The shadowy figure faltered, its form flickering. It was a battle of wills, of faith against an ancient power that had been perverted and enraged. Mark, however, was lost. He dropped to his knees, not in prayer to the cross, but in submission to the ground. "I'm sorry," he wept. "I'm so sorry." The shadow enveloped him. For a split second, we saw his terrified face, and then he was gone. The shadow receded back towards the altar, taking him with it. The humming stopped. The church was silent once more. Sarah and I scrambled back to the cellar window and climbed out into the rain-soaked night. We ran without looking back, the silence of St. Jude's more terrifying than any scream. We never spoke of what happened, not in detail. We couldn't. How do you tell someone that your friend was consumed by the very ground he stood on? Mark was reported missing. They searched for weeks, but found no trace. The town mourned, another tragedy to add to St. Jude's long, dark history. Years have passed. I moved away, but the memory of that night is branded into my soul. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still feel that hum, a faint vibration in the floorboards. I still hear the whispers in the deepest parts of my mind, promising me everything if I would just kneel. St. Jude still stands, a monument to arrogance, but I know what it truly is. It's a prison, and it's a mouth. And it is always, always hungry. The ground doesn't forget. And it's still waiting for the rest of its debt to be paid. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there.